And welcome to Professor Michael Welch.com as an introduction to the course, Torture and Human Rights. To repeat, torture and human rights. Those two controversial issues will be explored in depth in this course. In this first of several episodes to introduce you to the course, I want to take a moment to outline some of my professional and educational and scholarly activities. And this is my website, easy to find, ProfessorMichaelWelch.com. And let's just go through the splash page and offer our greetings. Thank you for taking time to visit ProfessorMichaelWelch.com, by the way. By way of introduction, I am a professor in criminal justice at Rutgers University in New Brunswick, New Jersey, U.S. of A. Specializing in criminology, state crime, and human rights. For years, I've examined racial and ethnic socioeconomic disparities in the criminal justice system, especially as they have emerged in the war on crime, the war on drugs, the war on undocumented immigrants, and for this course, the war on terror. Those developments are explored in several of my journal articles and books, in particular, and this is significant and relevant to this course, Crimes of Power and States of Impunity, the U.S. Response to Terror, which was a follow-up book to an earlier work titled Scapegoats of September 11th, Hate Crimes and State Crimes in the War on Terror. Other books that you might find interesting, Ironies of Imprisonment, Detained, Immigration Laws, and Expanding INS Jail Complex. Recently, my work has taken a cultural turn in a book titled Escape to Prison, Penal Tourism, and the Pull of Punishment. More recently, I am writing and finishing a book called The Bastille Effect, Sites and Symbols of Political Imprisonment. I will foreshadow, which is a technique in performance, in instruction, in teaching, where I am giving a little bit of information ahead of schedule only to return to it later with a fuller explanation. The Bastille Effect. I will be giving you some examples, some photographs of my field work, and let me just move on at this point because I want to return to the Bastille Effect and political imprisonment as it relates to torture and human rights. So this website describes my professional experience, research, publishing activities, and etc., etc. Okay, so we've established that. The bio, and this gives you a little bit more detail. Punishment, Foucault, human rights. So you're going to hear the name Michel Foucault, especially as we get into the theory of the body with respect to torture. My articles appear in various journals, and once again we see this book that we'll talk about a little bit later, Crimes of Power, States of Impunity, and Scapegoats of September 11th, Hate Crimes and State Crimes. Yes, states, governments, political entities can engage in criminal activity, not just white-collar offenses or economic or financial crimes, which they do, but also crimes that are violent. They perpetrate atrocities, genocide, torture, crimes against humanity. And we're going to see this emerge in the war on terror. And I mentioned here that I do a lot of lecturing, teach short courses, at universities in Europe, in Belgium, for example, and the Netherlands, and Latin America, South Africa, Hong Kong, Seoul, South Korea. What is significant here is I also spend lengthy periods of time doing research while based at other universities. And what we're going to talk about in these episodes is some of my work at the London School of Economics. I've also taught a short course on the War on Terror at the University of Bologna in Italy, as well as a considerable amount of time in Argentina, University of Sydney, Australia, with an emphasis on human rights there, and back to London School of Economics. And in 2017, I was a visiting professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Buenos Aires in Argentina. I mention these items because these are opportunities that I pursue that allow me to engage in field work. Reading is important, reading is fundamental, as we shall see, but it's also important for me as a sociologist to engage in field work, to actually go to these actual sites where crimes against humanity and torture have actually occurred, and to document those sites. Many of them have been repurposed as memorial sites. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. So let's shift gears slightly and talk about my scholarly activities in this introduction. This is my formal educational background, going back to 1978 when I was a seminarian. I left the seminary in 1978. There's no wild story about that. I just left. But what I did is I accepted a scholarship to another college, another Catholic college, Benedictine College in Atchison, Kansas, which is located about an hour outside of Kansas City. And I studied psychology there. And this is an important building block of my career, because I became particularly interested in psychology as a paradigm for helping people. And what we're going to see in this course is how that paradigm has become inverted, meaning that we now have, even in contemporary times, in the US of A, we have cases, incidents, allegations against psychologists who have used their knowledge and techniques in psychology and repurposed them, re-engineered them for purposes of inflicting pain and punishment in the course of interrogation. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let me pause there and mention that I then went for a master's degree in counseling psychology, where I worked in a psychiatric institution, and from there, another master's degree in criminal justice sciences with an emphasis on criminological theory, corrections, victimology, and then for a PhD in sociology at the University of North Texas with an emphasis on criminology, mental health, once again, social psychology, theory, and research methods. Along the way, I've worked in various prisons. I've worked in county jails in Texas and Illinois. I have been a professor of sociology at a correctional institution in Staten Island. While I was a professor at St. John's University, I taught a course on the sociology of prisons to prisoners at Arthur Kill Correctional Facility on Staten Island. And also, while I was a PhD student, I was a social science research analyst for the U.S. Department of Justice, the Federal Bureau of Prisons. I was based in a prison known as FCI Fort Worth, Federal Correctional Institution, Fort Worth, Texas, while I was a PhD student. And from there, I transitioned into a full-time academic. So let's go back to the 1980s when I was teaching courses on social problems and sociology of corrections at University of North Texas while a PhD student. Here is the item I just referred to in New York State Department of Corrections at Staten Island, and St. John's University, where I was teaching courses on white-collar crime, corporate crime, criminology, and more recently here at Rutgers University, teaching courses on interrogation and torture, political imprisonment, war on terror and human rights, state and corporate crime. These are all relevant. They were also stepping stones into developing the course that we're delivering in this module, which is torture and human rights. Rutgers University. And this is I've covered a lot of background information of what I do, and I mention them because oftentimes students ask me, how did you get from point A to point B? How did you go from an undergraduate student in psychology to a master's degree in psychology and a master's degree in criminal justice sciences and criminology and a PhD in sociology? And what I've provided in this very short introduction in this particular episode is my formal education and how it paralleled a lot of my professional experience. So let me take a pause there because I really need to get a cup of coffee, and then we're going to come back for episode 2. I'm going to talk a little bit more about my background professionally and in education, and how that figures into the way I teach this course on torture and human rights.